Well, back home and to our conversation of the day. Today's episode of Your Voice brings to you the best of both worlds, the new and the old media. Now, veteran media personality Kathleen Openda spoke to Brian Moshiri on life in the media back in the day and what has changed and, of course, the way forward.
This morning, Your Voice is in studio again because I speak to veteran journalist Kathleen Openda, who joins me on Zoom right now. How are you, madam? Where have you been, actually?
Actually, I moved into the communication space. I went behind the scenes, doing productions from behind the scenes, leading from behind, I guess. That's what I've been doing.
Now, you bring the journalism aspect and you watch television nowadays. Are Kenyan journalists getting lazy?
I'm not sure that it's as simple as that. There are very many studies that have, tried to analyze this phenomenon. But I do remember that during our time, our motivation was actually the craft of journalism, playing that role in society, providing a voice to the voiceless. And there was less emphasis on entertainment, more emphasis on the news, what has happened, why it's happened, and trying to disseminate the meaning of what has happened to help Kenyans or whoever is watching understand the situations better. But I think now with the digital age and so many channels available, all manner of shenanigans are employed to try and get viewership or to try and get readership. And so when you lose control of if you lose the control or you pander to the numbers and then you try to fit in and try to get attention, then you lose part of the core business of journalism.
Our managing editor here at the Nation Media Group, Joseph Warongo, is very loud on it's not about you as an anchor, you as a journalist, but it's about the story. What do you think about such sentiments from such a gentleman?
First of all, shout out to Joseph. We started KTN together, so we were teammates in the newsroom. And that's actually the difference. We were there for the story. It was not about us. People might have called us celebrities, but we certainly did not feel that way. We were immersed in the telling of the story, honing our crafts, making it better, researching and getting to understand our topics better so that we could deliver better product to those who were watching us.
You guys were popular in the 90s. How come we do not see the drama that we see with our day-to-day, perhaps, journalists in this day and age?
Again, it speaks to motivation. Why are you in front of the camera? Are you in front of the camera for yourself? Or are you in front of the camera to serve a purpose that without where you are not the center? Where it's the story, as Mr. Warungu keeps telling you guys. It's about the story, it's not about you. You are just a channel for the story. But if you become the center of the story, then you lose focus.
Kwa hivyo vile nilisema ya kwamba gazeti ni ya kufunga nyama ni sawa. Tuendelee namna hiyo.
Someni ile kwa gazeti, kesho tufunge naye nyama na tuendeshe serikali mbele.
Hii magazeti ni ya kufunga tu nyama, si ya kazi nyingine.
What do you make of such sentiments when you see that?
I think it's a good thing. It means that you've rubbed them up the wrong way as media, as journalists, that you're not pandering to their whims. So I would take it as a compliment.
But some of these media stations, madam, are owned by government or senior government officials. How then again do you balance as a media house or as a journalist on not blowing too much of the government trumpet and also bringing stories that relate to common mwananchi?
Well, it's not a new phenomenon. When we started KTN, it was actually owned by the powers that be at that time. We, as journalists, worked to get the story. The ownership stuff and all that maneno was the editors and the publishers' problem. But you see, if you are not credible in the information that you are giving, nobody's going to watch you.
Journalists now have to deal with social media. Do you think it's becoming harder? I mean, a typical journalist may need to be a brand ambassador for some brand.
Yeah, well, then you decide if you want to be a journalist or you want to be an influencer. There's something wrong with presenting yourself as a journalist and then trying to stretch the edges a little bit into something else. Then you stop being a journalist. Then it means that you're not being truthful in how you present yourself, because there are certain ethics and guidelines for journalists that make them that way. There is a fallacy out there that if you're not on television or if you're not in the limelight, that there is no life beyond it. There is, by the way, and it's much richer, much fuller. I have enjoyed my anonymity thoroughly, so that people are not distracted by this is so and so, but would actually listen to me for me.
Yeah.
Because what I have to say is interesting, but they're not staring at me because they've seen me on television or think they know me because they've seen me on television. I can be my authentic self without having to live up to the expectations of others. Just be.
Wow. Thank you very much. Any final remarks from your end, perhaps? Something you'd like to give as advice to young people like me in the media?
Keep it simple. It's always about the story. It's not about you. And don't believe your own press releases. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid.
Thank you very much. Have a good one. We really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for having us, and thank you for joining us at this point in time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and all the best.
Media personality Kathleen Openda right there, just saying to young people and journalists in the industry, keep it simple, trust the process, and it's not about you, it's about the story that you're giving. Good morning. I'm Brian Mushiri.
Thank you so much, Brian Mushiri, and definitely Kathleen Openda gives us focus on the conversation we're having today and great nuggets coming from her own experience in this space. And joining us on this conversation to even take this conversation further in studio with me is Janet Mbogwa. She is a media personality, author, My First Time, and of course, founder Inuadada Foundation. We're also joined in the other studio by Nema Omai, who is a media director at Ipsos SSA, and joining us virtually, the gentleman that is Monene Nyaga, who is a media personality. Most of you remember him as a former radio presenter. And of course, we have Macharia Gaito, who is an independent journalist and with the Daily Nation as a columnist. Thank you all for joining us on this conversation. Janet, I could see you agreeing with Kathleen, even as she kept talking about what the role of this space is. And for you, when you think about how much has changed with the time, what was your why getting into this space?
I love that. First of all, good to see you, Gladys.
Good to see you
Love
too.
your voice. I'm such a huge Kathleen Openda fan. I feel like seeing her just took me back to the days I would watch her. Grew up watching Kathleen, Beatrice Marshall, Oprah. Just it's just very amazing to see her come to life. And I agree with so much of what she's saying. I think I came into the industry, especially for news. I was 23, so I was very young. I hesitated when I was called on to do it. And I remember telling my bosses at the time, are you sure you want to put that caliber and that gravitas of a space in my hands? And they said, why do we feel like we believe in you more than you do? I had to trust them, trust the process. My first entry was very similar to what Kathleen said. From the very beginning, I never thought it was about me. I'm not sure what shaped that. But I thank God that that's how I entered the industry. And in many ways, that's how I left. I think in between, I was trying to navigate different opportunities within that. Kathleen mentioned, because Brian asked a good question, some anchors or journalists stretch and become influencers or brand ambassadors. And she replied and said, choose one. You can't say you're a journalist and you're endorsing a brand that you might end up having to report a scandal on. But I did. I endorsed brands, etc. And I just think I was trying to stretch my wings beyond what it is I was doing. So I don't think I have any regrets, but I think one of the reasons I stepped back was to truly evaluate. For many reasons I stepped back, right? And I think I'll always go back. I love TV. I believe I will go back, and I believe that's what I will do for the rest of my time. But I had to step back because I was in conflict within myself about the ethics, about what it is I was standing for. What was my job? My job wasn't about the package, how I appear, even though it is important. It's one of those jobs you can't deny. But that wasn't the priority. The priority was, am I delivering the news? Is there impact? Am I threading, so to speak, with the audience? Does the audience feel like they can connect with the story I'm telling? But then I did kind of, within that space, still spread my wings, trying to explore other opportunities that came my way, and eventually step back to say, just figure out how you want to scale without affecting or compromising the true ethics of journalism. So it's been powerful to hear her say that.
Excellent. And let me bring in the gentleman here. Macharia, just listening to Kathleen and to think that you've also been in this space for a while. What was your why?
First of all, good morning, everybody. I see many old friends there who have not met in a long time. Happy to meet you again. I hope one soon we'll be able to meet physically. There's something about journalism. I always say it is more than a vocation. It is more than a profession. It is a calling. It is bound by certain conventions and regulations. And I think the importance of journalism is that we can see that in the Constitution of Kenya, it is the only specific profession, or you call it a business if you will, that is protected by the Constitution. And I think that just shows the enormity of where we are and the responsibilities thrust on us. We're not called the fourth estate for nothing. We are the fourth arm of government. We are the watchdog of society. We are expected not just to be role models, but to set the agenda, to call truth to power. And obviously, as we are doing that, we must ourselves be above reproach. I heard what Janet said with interest, the conflict she had when she's endorsing brands and being a journalist. And it's good that she appreciated that there's a conflict, because today we see too much of that. Secondly is there's a term I find very interesting. You have used it, and I heard it was used on Kathleen Openda.
Yes.
Media personality. And I've always tried to figure out, what is a media personality? Is a media personality a person in the media who is above journalism? Who is there for herself or for himself? A brand rather than a journalist? Things like those are conversations we must continue to have, especially as the media grows so much in terms of space and reach, particularly the electronic media. The channels which are growing online, which are beyond the normal control of the regulatory authorities. We must continue having these conversations within us. It is our responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Well said, Macharia, and we'll definitely delve further into this conversation. Monene Nyaga, I met you back in 2003. I was a young girl out of campus. You were thriving in the radio space. And then later on, I found out you are a trained linguistic teacher. How did you end up in the broadcast space, and why?
Well, I think it was quite by coincidence, because I saw an advert, and the weirdest thing about the advert, it was asking for a demo. Now, for someone who has never been in the media space, the best I could do was to read my CV in English and Swahili. And when I came for the interviews, and I sat there, and there was Tony Patti, and there was Dennis Gachanja, and looking at all these guys, and you're thinking, wait, have I come to the right room? And subsequently, I met Mr. Wilfred Kiboro, who was the CEO at that time. And the only question I was asked is, if you know this tape, the cassette I had sent as a demo was there on the desk in the very imposing boardroom on the 5th floor. And yes, I said yes. And so I was asked, so why do you want to do this? I said, I like telling stories, and I like engaging with people, and I like getting to the core of issues. And so he looked at me and he said, well, I think you're in the right place. And that's how it started. But I think coming back to my earlier years, 1983, I remember I used to be Macbeth's son in a play where we used to act with Professor Njiko Motia, the late Professor Were. There was a huge host. I was the only kid at that time, and I used to be brought back at midnight. And so guys used to ask me, what do you do? I mean, what is a standard 4 kid doing in a theater full of people? I said, I love it. And I think that basically was the springboard. Now, just to cut a long story short, I found myself where I was, and I'm loving it ever since.
Okay, so it has been many years. You're now retired, especially on as a broadcast journalist. But what was the why? What kept you there? What kept you to a point where people would say, I see you, we celebrate you for your work?
I think, one, you have to stay true to what you believe in. Because it's very easy to get swayed with time, because there's a lot of influence. There's money thrown at you. There's temptation for you to cut corners. There's even, I was listening to Kathleen Opena when she was saying media personalities wanted to become brand ambassadors. I think now guys in the media or journalists want to become politicians. You want to replace the people who you're holding to account. And if you look at the transition, especially with the vernacular stations, that tends to happen a lot. But I think you need to, first of all, just stay true to your cause. And it, to a large extent, gets you educated, because with every encounter, whether it's with somebody in the ministry or an NGO or a county, you get to learn something that you did not know before. And I think it also helps me in making my decisions personally. But by and large, it is very important to understand that you are the lobby for the people who do not have lobby groups. You know, business has lobby groups, politicians have lobby groups. So who lobbies for the voiceless? And I think that is the place where if you stay true to what you do, then you remain relevant and you get to enjoy what you do.
We hear you, Munene, and I'd like to hear from Nema. Nema, before you got, of course, into Ipsos, you've worked in the agency world and you are a consumer of the media. What are the things that you miss now that we're talking about the revolution and how things have changed, and you've heard from these veterans talk about the same?
I think what I miss most is authenticity, but maybe just to go back a bit, I have been on the agency side, but I've also been on the media house side. For the longest time, I was in advertising at the Nation Media Group. And listening to Kathleen, listening to Macharia, I was reminded of some of the legendary battles we used to have about the thin line between advertising and editorial independence. And some of the things I remember is when I would go out, sell this very huge campaign, and then come back and there's a story that's running about that particular company that now makes that company say that we're going to cancel all advertising that we're doing with you because of this story, unless you can pull it out. And then I remember going to third floor, because that is where I used to reside, and having my battles with the then editor, Joe Dindo. If it was not Joe, it was Tom Shindy. And one of the things they always said, they said, okay, look, we appreciate that you're going out, we appreciate that you're selling space, but remember, the reason why we are as strong as we are is because of editorial integrity and editorial policy that we have. One of the things I really miss as a consumer, but also as somebody who's been in this space, is I find that there's not as much authenticity as there was. There's no authenticity in terms of the kind of programming that we're doing, at least that from what I see. But then again, maybe it's an age thing. There's no authenticity in terms of the depth of the stories that I see being carried on our different news bulletins. And it makes me sad, because sometimes you would get into a story, it starts out very well, you're listening, you're really engaged with that story, and then you're left with a so what? And then you keep hoping that maybe at some point later, they will cover that story again, or they will go further and give you more detail. And it doesn't happen. I mean, I understand that there are commercial considerations, I understand that there's limited time, but I'm going to answer very boldly what Kathleen refused to answer. I think journalists have become lazy. So that's what I miss as a consumer.
Oh, wow. Straight to the point. Thank you, Nema, for pointing that out. Let me bring in Janet on this one. She talks about authenticity, which to a large extent points to the credibility of this space. What does that mean for you?
Credibility and authenticity are everything. It means that you are essentially at the steering wheel when it comes to what the audience consumes. You know, this work, and I think Macharia said it so well, it is a calling. It's something that, and in many ways, I embraced and appreciated. There's so much that lies on what it is you're communicating. So if you're not credible, if you haven't fact-checked, if you are not authentic in even relating or connecting to the story, to the news, something gets lost in translation, at least for me. You know, in many ways, I do also struggle to see how things have shifted. I mean, my peers on this interview are truly veterans. It's humbling to be among them. So I can't speak from so far back, but, and I realized, rusty as I am, I forgot to answer your why question.
Yes.
So I'll try and combine it with this one. But in many ways, like Munene, my why was because I love storytelling. So it was interesting to hear him say that. I actually first did radio when I was 19 years old. It was a gap year. I left high school at about 17 and a half or so. And I wanted to take a gap year, which my parents were like, well and good, just get a job. You know, we're not going to. So long story short, found myself doing a radio gig in Mombasa, because that's where I grew up. Because somebody said, hey, you sound like you have a voice for radio. I hadn't at that time thought I'd have a relationship with media. I did know that I was absolutely in love with radio at the time. Capital precisely at that time because of the storytelling and the content and the interviews, even though I was quite young. So ended up doing radio at 19. So I can speak from that time. The way I entered the industry was about credibility and authenticity. That's the seed that was put in me from a very long time ago. I was trained by people who'd been doing it for decades. Some of the greats that even my parents would listen to were suddenly the people training me. So that's, you know, then ended up doing a late night show as my stepping stone, and then ended up doing a mid-morning show at 19. Came back years later to then join TV to do a travel show. Was hesitant to join the newsroom, as I mentioned. And my why at the time to join the newsroom was I felt like I had a duty in some way, especially because the elections were around the corner. This was 2007. And even when I left to go to South Africa, the reason I came back when I did was because of the elections. It was very intentional. So that's my why, was I have a duty to let people know what's happening. Not that it's about me, not to coddle or make anyone feel better, but to honestly tell people what's happening, what is happening in our country, who ought to be held accountable for actions, what trends are informing some of the decisions we're making. That's always been my why. It still is, even with the work I do around impact. And so, yes, I struggle with the credibility thing because sometimes it has been compromised. We're in a very strange time when things like fake news are coming about. Social media is obviously the biggest movement right now. But, you know, mainstream media is looked at as, if we need to fact check something that is trending, a conversation on social media, we need to rely on mainstream media. We need to go back and watch the news at 9 to make sure that it's not a make-believe story. What's saddening to me is when sometimes that is also compromised for, you know, because maybe it's feeding somebody's agenda. You know, somebody mentioned armchair journalism. I think Nema also mentioned the laziness factor. So that even for me is a struggle now, is who do you really believe? And the other day I remember seeing somebody say, because people like Trevor Noah and Hassan Minhaj have become so big, they're big because of the politics they talk about. They're comedians. And somebody said, sometimes when we want to listen in on what is actually happening, why are we listening to comedians? They're giving us more factual news than, you know, newsrooms. So I do panic sometimes. And I think I do get concerned when I have to question credibility when you know that a certain agenda is being pushed for certain reasons. So really, where does the truth lie is, I think, the biggest concern right now.
That is a very good question. Now, remember, our question of the day to you today is, if you had influence on content on any of the mediums, could be radio, social media, TV, print, what would you prioritize? Let's hear from you. That hashtag is new normal. And Juma Hassan says freedom of expression and the right to true information in Kenya. Thank you, Juma. We have another one here from Kerry who says, hunger-stricken communities, high cost of living, youth empowerment, just to mention but a few. Well, I hope those in the media are taking note of this. This is what our viewers want. Amos Onditi says, investigating the land question and fair demolition without communication and compensation for the victims. Amos, thank you for writing in. Do we have another one? Yes, Marcy says, I'd go for mental health awareness, making treatment affordable and accessible. Again, core issues that matter to our audience. Faniers Maingi says, reduce the attention given to the political class, then focus on the real news problems affecting the Mwananchi and unearthing the corrupt, investigating the insecurities in various parts of the country and the drought and the false promises of these elected leaders. Those are your comments. Keep them coming through. Hashtag New Normal. And of course, you can reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. Now, Macharia, even as we hear what the viewers are saying they would prioritize and listening to the question of where did our credibility go or where does it lie today? From where you sit, where did the rain start beating us?
You know, it would be very easy for those of us who have been there, done that, and have now left the newsroom to be ultra critical of those who are there now. And it's something I really don't like to do, but I do in very many spaces. Give my views, pick up the daily newspaper, and comment on how it has covered this and that story. But I like to do it from a positive perspective rather than just being negative. Yes, it is true there are issues about the media today, but also the media of today could not have been the media of yesterday. There are issues, of course, about credibility. We say we are one of the most trusted institutions, but I think with successive surveys, you'll see there's an erosion of that trust. But of course, also there is this whole monster called social media. And sometimes there is a blur in the divide between social media and mainstream media. So quite often when people talk about mistrusting the media and the media spreading fake news, they're not talking about what is in the Nation or Standard or Citizen TV or anything else. They're talking about what they have come across on social media. There is a need for us to keep a tight lid, I think, on radio particularly. You saw the recent incident involving some radio presenters. But everywhere you go across the country, you will see small radio stations coming up which are owned by politicians. And they exist for nothing more than to glorify those politicians and to fight their enemies. And quite often you will find that the presenters are not trained, they are not paid, they're supposed to somehow just survive because they like being on the microphone. These are things we really need to talk about enhancing professionalism. When we talk about journalists of today being lazy, I wonder why, because they have such resources at their fingertips. On their phone, they can get any encyclopedia in the world. We had to go physically to the library to look for back issues of papers of 10 years ago to get some, to check some background and so on. We don't do enough on background. We don't do enough on fact checking, yet we have the resources. Another thing which is worrying, and I think, is the blur between commercial and editorial. We used to call it the separation between church and state. Today, as we struggle to survive in this new environment, we are seeing editors and journalists increasingly called upon to get involved in the search for commercial revenues. We are seeing on radio every single day the fellow who is on the microphone giving you the news or the events of the day or the talk show without a pause, going into selling a mogoda or a car or promoting some betting site. You know, that's quite crazy. It is wrong. It is even against the code of practice for the code of ethics for the code of ethics for the practice of journalism in Kenya. And I think this is something we should really watch out for, because it erodes our credibility. We don't operate where we did in 1942. We don't. Those guys who are in the 70s didn't operate where the guys in 1942 were, and so on and so forth. I will always say, those who say that the media today is useless, take a copy of The Nation or The Standard or The Star today. Take a copy of 10 years ago, a copy of 20 years ago, a copy of 30 years ago, and let us look, is it really worse than it used to be? A long time, when I joined the media, that was many years ago, some of you are not, I don't think some of you are born. The media was about, the mainstream newspapers were about he said, she said. The chief said this, the DC said this, the minister said this. There was no background. There was no context. There was no analysis. There were no opinion pieces. Today we have opinion pieces all over the place. Today almost every story must have background and context, particularly the major stories. Investigative stories, long read features are the order of the day. We never had those 30 years ago. So we can really not say that the newspapers today are worse than they were 30 years ago. 10, 20 years ago, there was no, let's say 20 years ago, there was no independent broadcast. Everything was KBC. One TV station, one radio station. And the headlines were as predictable as the sun rising in the east. Mtukufu Rais today was in church. Mtukufu Rais today attended this meeting. Mtukufu, you know, there was nothing. Today we have radio stations left, right, and center. TV stations all over the place. Each addressing their own particular audiences and niches and what have you. Why should we complain? Yes, so they become more difficult to regulate. They become more difficult to manage. But I'd rather have a little bit of tyranny than go back to those days of state control. As simple as that.
Macharia, you raise a very good point. That link between content and revenue and how those wars have actually shaped what we're seeing today. And Nema, you actually shared with me some of your latest research, which was quite interesting to look at. And let's share this with our audiences. We know that in 2015, we digitally migrated, and therein lies now all the different radio stations and, you know, hundreds of radio stations and TV stations today. Just walk us through that slide we're seeing on screen.
Okay, so since 2015, I'd say that media in Kenya has changed, not just in 6 years, but I think 6 years, 2 decades in 6 years. Like you just mentioned, when we started in 2015, before the migration, we had about 100 stations. And that was a combination of radio and TV. But now we have more than 250. And if you look at it on the local front, more than 60 TV stations are free to air. And I'm not even including the more than 300 that are international stations. In terms of radio, we moved from the 100 stations that we're talking about to more than, the last check, CA told us it was about 190 stations around the country. But what is really interesting, that was not there 2015, is that the growth of vernacular, community, and niche stations. Vernacular stations have become very big. In fact, when we look at TV, for instance, you'll find that one of the biggest stations we have nationally is actually a vernacular station, which is something you could not even have imagined 5, let alone 6 years ago. Social media is growing in prominence. I think Macharia already alluded to that, and is being seen as an authoritative voice. I put that in apostrophe, Because authoritative, according to who, is a question. But we do know that people tend to believe a lot of what they read on social media. They only come to authenticate it and check the facts when they come to the main stations. Again, our population growth, that I think speaks for itself. The last census put it at 46 million, but we're estimated right now to be at about 52 million as a country. And something that was not there, what you call video on demand. We're seeing increasing subscriptions to sites like Viusasa, Showmax, Netflix, Amazon. All those are growing. I mean, Kenya is not an island. Whatever is happening globally is also happening here. One of the things that has come out that is very, very, very interesting, and it comes out in every single research we do, there's a lot of concern from consumers about fake news. They don't know what is correct, what is true, and what is not true. So when you put all those things together, indeed what Macharia says is very true. The media we have now is extremely different from what was there even as recently as 6 years ago. But one of the things I think we need to ask ourselves, yes, media has grown, yes, a number of platforms have grown, but there's still basic tenets that we must adhere to, which I feel are not being adhered to as much as they should. And I want to go back to the question around commercial considerations and editorial. What makes a station strong, according to the different researches we do as Ipsos around the world, is how powerful your content is. Content is what drives eyeballs. Content is what makes people want to associate their brands with you. And the thing is, content can only be developed once you understand exactly who your audience is and what they're looking for. I think there's a really big gap in this market in terms of the link between understanding what the data says in terms of who our audiences are and the kind of content we're producing, and thereafter the kind of advertising we're allowing into our stations or into our environments. So I'd really like us to maybe explore that a little bit more in this discussion.
Okay, and fair enough. Monene Nyaga, you've been on radio for a while now, and clearly we cannot understate the power of radio. And I think even on that slide, there is a slide that says radio still reigns supreme. But even as we try and secure the eyeballs or the listenership and also try to get the money in, how is this now compromising on the content as we are seeing it today?
I think I want to pick up from where Neema left. The fact that you find a lot of vernacular stations are doing very well is because they connect. One, they know who they are talking to. Language is exclusive. You know, if you don't understand it, you're not there. And again, in Kenya, it also is geographical. So the issues, the geography, the economy, the politics, all those things, they are very relevant. And so there lies in the question. And I think given that we have 100 and something radio stations, I want to draw a parallel. Nowadays, you will find a lot of urban consumers treat radio stations the same way they treat their WhatsApp groups. There's the one where your mother is, there's the one for your former college mates, high school mates, and there's one for the estate. There is one that normally pops up for fundraising. And then there's the other one for sharing that other material that we don't talk about that makes a lot of money for telcos on data. And I think that's exactly what we need to be asking ourselves, because the presenters on the radio stations nowadays, most of them are like they're the group admins. They decide what we talk about. They decide who they admit. And it's actually supposed to be the other way around, because once you define your audience, you then have to tell us or to understand what makes them tick. And looking at the tweets that you are showing, it's very interesting to find the issues that Kenyans find pertinent to them. However, if the presenter has carte blanche, mainly because they have been put there because they've got this huge following, maybe on online, they are a comedian, they are a musician, they have almost 90% control of content. And also going back to what Macharia said, I think the biggest challenge that mainstream media has is verification, because everybody is a journalist. If it's an accident or something that's happening, all you need is a phone and you have video, and then you say, this is what is happening now. Now, the verification aspect is very important. Secondly, you have to interrogate. And so how do you interrogate? Are you the kind of person who would then call a resource person who will then verify your information, whether it's an OCPD, whether it's a Matiang's office, whether it is the office of the president? And when it comes to hardcore journalism, and this I totally agree with Mashira Gaido, you see, when it comes to investigative journalism, and that is where we have a big problem. There's a very huge distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is when you have got people who are untrained and do not bother even to consume news or to read. And so they spread the same information as concocted as it is to their audiences. And the audiences take it as gospel truth. However, there is also disinformation, which is very deliberate. This is pure propaganda, which actually comes from the people who you've given responsibility. And therefore, if there's a scandal in a county, there's a scandal in a ministry, the statement that comes from there, the first thing you say is, but that's not true. And now the job is for the true journalists to go and prove why it's not true. And this actually now is the hardest part, and it's what separates the true journalists to the wannabes. And I want to say this, and I really feel sad about it. And I once posted it on Facebook, and the guys who almost ate me. And I said, if a radio station's main content is gambling, how do you expect morals from a casino? Because what we are doing, and I shall make this analogy, and please take it as an analogy. Assume we are in the forest, and you see a lot of gazelles and other grazers, they like to graze near the trees because the trees have monkeys. Now the monkeys are the people on the high ground, who in this case are the presenters and the journalists. So anytime the monkey shrieks, the animals pay attention because they need to know what's happening. Are we about to be eaten? Should we run? Should we be on guard? But unfortunately, if the monkeys decide to come down to graze, anytime they shriek, now the other grazers just look at them. So what do you want now? What are you looking for? And of course, with the forces that be that also want to keep media in check, they decide these monkeys are too much. Let's cut down these trees. You stifle revenues. So what happens to the monkeys? The monkeys run to the hills. So every little hill has monkeys there, and they get to see different things. And so they say what is within the line of sight. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's the sphere we're in now. So every place you listen to, every information is coming from the hill with the monkeys there and what they can see. And you can't blame them because that is what they can see. And that's what they keep saying. And I came across something that made me pretty amazed. There is a fundamental human fault, which sometimes as radio consumers, and if you're a clever presenter, you tend to take advantage of. If you had the opportunity to go and put a microphone inside a confession box, and then you put it on an amplifier and everybody listens to everybody's confession, it is amazing because we like to hear other people's sins. And incidentally, I think it's from a German name, it's called Schadenfreude or something. There's a part of us that either gets entertainment or pleasure from other people's failures and misfortunes and pain. And it is exemplified not just in stories. Look at our Man U and Arsenal matches. Some people literally hang themselves. It's, you lost, and somebody will tell you lost for like 3 days, or they meet you at the local. And in politics, what are you telling us? And you got 50 votes. And that family that you used to think that they used to do so well, nowadays they can't pay their bills. That guy who used to drive the big cars, now is busy begging us for help. And the moment you tap into that, you get an audience. Is it what we should be focusing on? It's a niche, and they will say that's their niche because that is what brings me the people. And I think Naima will agree with me because, as Macharia said, when things are tight, there are two things that people are looking for. They want a job. How do you keep your job? You get the numbers, because the numbers get you the money. Yeah. How you do that, I think it is up to others to discuss, but nowadays it's open for everybody to play the game the best way they know how.
Pertinent issues brought up there by Monene Nyaga. We're about to take a first short break here on Your World. And when we come back, this question needs to be answered. What makes a good journalist? Is it the training or is it the talent? Considering that we are all talking about the ethics of this business being eroded with time. So what makes a good journalist? Is it the talent or is it the training? But before I take that short break, my director tells me that you're still talking to us, telling us if you had influence on content in the media, what you would prioritize. Let's have that on screen. Peter Njenga says, exposing corruption in the government. Thank you, Peter. Nana Moye says, mental and sexual health. Thank you. Thank you. John Marsh says, unbiased news. It is sad that this is actually being said to be prioritized. Yes, it's our core business. Jimmy Mboro says, 1, expose and black out corrupt leaders. Secondly, highlight high performers in and out of government. 3rd, speak as one as media association. And 4, draw a line on content that is morally right for future references and upcoming generation. Jimmy, thank you so much. And Manu here says, censor all explicit contents in shows, talks, and on print. Thank you for sharing. That is that hashtag a new normal, and you can also reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. We'll be right back.
Vaseline Skincare. Vaseline locks in any moisture on your face without adding other ingredients that might irritate your skin. A layer of Vaseline applied before you sleep can help restore your face's natural level of moisture and softness.
To keep skin restored, that's the healing power of Vaseline.
Maritime Tips, brought to you by Kenya Maritime Authority. Precautions for boat owners, crew, and passengers. Keep a distance of 2 meters between each other. Disinfect life jackets regularly. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces on board the boats and vessels, such as steering wheel, safety or guardrails, and seats. Provide disposal bins with lids on board boats and vessels. Limit passenger capacity to 50%. Stay home if you have flu-like symptoms. Stay safe. Stop the spread of coronavirus. Kenya Maritime Authority for safe and efficient water transport. Find us on www.kma.go.ke or Facebook Kenya Maritime Authority, Twitter at KMA Kenya, or YouTube Kenya Maritime Authority.
Now, as we enter another chapter of the COVID-19 pandemic, rest assured that we aim to deliver the same level of professionalism, excellence, and integrity you have come to expect from us. We did it once before, and now we are better prepared and equipped to ensure that our future leaders get what they truly deserve, the best education. Applications can be done online via ztech.ac.ke.
Just 1 capful of Dettol is enough to disinfect surfaces and protect your family and your home. Dettol, tested effective against COVID-19.
April 20th is just around the corner. It should be the deadline for compliance with the first installment of the minimum tax for companies whose financial year ended on December 31st, 2020. What should you expect?
Whether you're making a profit or not, you need to calculate to determine how much minimum tax you're paying and compare it with the installment and pay the higher of the two.
In the event of non-compliance, what are the repercussions?
Section 83 of Tax Procedures Act is very clear. Anyone who fails to pay any form of tax.
In the next edition of Business Redefined, we speak to Samuel Maura for this and more.
To get a Pondi by Awiko, dial star 812 star 802 hash. Skiza na Nation.
NTV Jioni, habari za kina, fasaha, tendeti na za kuaminika.
Try Panadol Advance for relief from headaches, body aches, and fever. With Panadol's Optizorb formula, the tablet gently breaks down in the stomach, quickly absorbs, and starts providing pain relief in 15 minutes. For fast and effective pain relief that you can trust, try Panadol Advance.
Thank you for staying with your world. My name is Gladys Gachanja. This morning we're talking about the revolution of media. Clearly there is the old versus the new, and in between a lot of dynamics have changed. But are we still performing or, living up to our key mandate, which is to inform, educate and entertain you? Well, helping us along with this conversation is Janet Mbugwa. She is a media personality. She's also an author and founder in Wadada Foundation. Nema Wamai, media director, Ipsos SSA, Monene Nyaga, media personality, former radio presenter, and of course Macharia Gaito, who is an independent journalist at the Daily Nation, and he always has a column that is quite catchy for you to catch on every single week. And so far, we've talked so much about what it is that is missing and how the revolution has seen some things fall off and some of the things we need to get back with. And my question before we went to the break was, what makes a good journalist? Is it the talent or is it the training? Janet, which is it?
We were just having this conversation during the break with Gladys, and I think it's incredible. We were trained by the same people, you and I, industry greats, people who had expertise, experience, passion, authenticity, and that never really leaves you. I think it's a bit of both. The way I came into the space and the reason why I was very intentional about it being on the content, the power you hold behind the microphone, as you mentioned, and the responsibility that comes with your delivery. It was less about the optics, always had been, even though I know later on that became a big part of it, which I'll get into, because like I said, I feel like I was kind of in transition, and I was in between old power and new power, which I still am. But there is a talent as well that you need. There needs to be a sense of an ease in which you're able to talk to the audience. Creativity also comes in how you put your stories together. We've seen some incredible feature stories that have come out of Kenya that have won global awards. And so it's a mix of both. You cannot do without the training. Now, I think I appreciate the people who trained me. And I feel like maybe the newer cusp of journalists, I get a sense sometimes of, I wish you had access to the trainers we had access to at the time, because I think they kind of, at a certain point, they went on to do other things and they were not available and they were not doing the work in media anymore. And so there has to be a bit of both. Right now, creativity is also as popular as training. Like I said, we're in a very interesting dynamic, right, with the onset of social media. Content creators who are extremely creative, extremely colorful, are massive. They are, you know, to the word that they're described, influencers. I know that word has some problematic connotations, but let's take it as it is. They are influential. They have hundreds of thousands of people following them, leading on them for what they advise, whether it's a trend, whether it's a serious matter. And so I find myself observing all of this with a very interesting eye, because I came from very intense training, whether it was on radio with, you know, Phil Matthews. I think I did one of my first shows with Oyunga Pala. So, you know, people who'd been in the industry for a while. And then when I entered TV in 07, at the time there was, you know, Farida Karone, and then ended up going and Washira Waroro. So very interesting. I think people who had been in the industry long enough to fully understand the gravitas and importance of what it means to be a journalist, right? That was my background. And so I took that. I was a breaking news anchor for a long time. I remember at some point I was appointed a breaking news anchor, and I remember being told, you know, it's because you stick to the facts, and we appreciate that. So I never let that leave me. And even when I continued into elections, whatever it is, I tried to stick very hard to that. At the same time, I was there when everything was switched off, the onset of the digital migration. Yes. And I found that fascinating. I was so fascinated by everything happening. I understood the fear behind it because a lot of people were unsure. It's a new thing. You know, am I going to lose my job? Are things going to be different? But I approached it with, this is interesting. And then comes social media. When I left TV in 2017, it was a very, very natural transition for me to extend the same message onto my digital platform. It wasn't obsessively intentional, meaning I didn't say, I'm going to leave TV and I'm going to do incredible things on social media. But guess what? I was able to kind of create the same engagement on my platforms. And so I hosted a show that was really around social issues. And so when I see that some of the messages coming in right now, I completely resonate. I find it really sad that a lot of the time social issues are underreported. It's changing. I mean, there's everything to do with your health and a lot of other segments, but still, it's not as prioritized as it should be, right? And so when I did my show for 4 or 5 years, which was a lot about social impact, social issues, that's exactly how I started my foundation, because of a story around period poverty. And so I extended those conversations on social media, and there I found my new frontier. So in as much as there's always this unsettling feeling about the power being in the hands of new content creators and social media. I get why that can be unnerving, but I also feel like there's a balance. There's a good and bad to everything. We cannot ignore the power and sort of the takeover of social media. How we use it, even as journalists who've been there for a long time, is what matters. And I extended my conversations on social issues, menstrual health, reproductive health, like what one of the listeners wrote in about. And it changed the course of my life, again, because I approached it as seeing how can I extend my conversation without compromising on the ethics and the training that I came with. So even when I was putting up captions, I was looking at it 1, 2, 3 times before I hit post, because I still had that in my mind. If you're going to post a caption, people are looking to you as an authoritative figure who can kind of shape an opinion or behavior, and I don't take that lightly. 4 years in, I have millions of followers on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all these things, and I know that there's a huge hype around it. There's people who say, oh my gosh, 1 million followers, that's incredible. I think, again, because of my background in traditional media, I don't look at it as this obsessive, amazing cultural shift. I look at it as an extension of the journalism that I knew to a new platform that's reaching a younger demographic, a wider demographic, a global audience, and still carrying the same responsibility with it. But yes, I do witness the tug of war where mainstream media veterans sometimes are very irked by social media because it can be problematic. You can start a huge crisis by tweeting something, you know, and that for me is an issue, is the verification that Mashayo talked about. I am still uncomfortable with unverified accounts creating issues, but I do not in any one way, I don't see it as a small thing. I look at it as this massive opportunity to take what you know and translate it in a different way. That's how I started my foundation. That's how I ended up meeting, working with partners around the world, was just translating that and extending it to social media. I feel like I don't know, have I answered your question?
Yes, you have. You have. And I'm gonna, let me just stop you there because we'll come back to now the legacy bit of it, which is what most people don't think about when you get into this space. But Monene, let me bring you in on this one. Training versus talent. There's a lot of talent out there that comes with huge numbers because of their popularity. But then again, we're putting them behind microphones. And we just said these spaces can literally make or break a people. Your thoughts?
I'll say this. And as Jared said, it's both. First, I shall say that I was very lucky when I joined Nation Media Group. One of my trainers was Mr. Motegi Njau. Well, his kind of training was not teaching you how to float by throwing you in the deep end and showing you how not to drown. And it was hardcore and it was unforgiving and it worked. We also had the pleasure of having a former AG, Geto Moigai. He came and taught us media law. As in, because you have to be taught the boundaries. You know, you can't just wake up and because you have a microphone and say, Governor X is an idiot, and then you start trying to explain yourself, or Lady X is loose, or you know there are boundaries, and this is what guides you because you have got this platform, and that is how you're supposed to use it. We also had guys coming in from the BBC, and the biggest thing was that even in our input, we took what they gave us, but we decided to localize it, to make it relevant to our audiences based on what it is that they're going through. What does the person who's listening to you do when they wake up in the morning? What are they doing at lunchtime? What are they doing in the afternoon? What are they doing in the evening? And so your brand maps their lifestyle. And you see, I hear a lot of stuff being said about social media, being WhatsApp and Facebook. I think the telephone was the first social media. I could call someone from far. And then when radio came in, it became social media because then we could send salams. And finally, the phone was included in the radio. And so now we could talk to guys far away and find out what they're doing. And that is WhatsApp. That's exactly what WhatsApp is. And so how then do you tailor your medium to be able to work best for you? I think talent is also a big deal. Now, why am I saying this? All of us here, including you, Gladys, I think we can all run, but we have never gone to the Olympic trials. And I don't think we would even be considered. Now, what is happening is that a lot of young guys, they see Janet, they see Monene, they see all other guys who maybe really or not are living the life. And so that's what they want to become. But the question is, do you have what it takes apart from the training? And you see, this is the hard thing. It's like you sometimes you have to be the Simon Cowell of media because yeah, I know you have the drive, I know but you can't. You know, you can't sing. You can, and sometimes it's also very good to be honest because there are a lot of good things to be done and they are lucrative. Now, let me come to a point that Janet was trying to explain. And I think when it comes to media influencers, it's an opportunity to make money for somebody with a profile and a following. But I think what maybe we need to move away from is consumerism influencing. And you see, this is where the rubber meets the road. well, the gadgets, the phones, the cars, well, fine. But there have been Trojan influencers where you've been taken, you've got the numbers, and then some fictitious land company comes and uses you to influence guys to go and buy land in their place. And because they had Monene has a house, or the Macharia has 5 or 10, and they think, now this is the guy who's been there, he knows exactly what these guys are talking about, I shall follow them. And then you end up being thrown off the cliff. I think what we need to move to transformative influencing. Now, let me give an example. If you look at what is happening nowadays, and especially in our political circles, and when people are trying to mobilize, everybody is running to the borders. Why? Because there are many, because they are working, and because it is an industry that stands on its own. What is the genesis of the border industry? I remember our president right now was the Minister of Finance. I think he was also the Deputy Prime Minister. When he made the announcement where he zero-rated pikipikis, they didn't give money to anybody. They didn't say, now we are dishing out money to the youth. So everybody went, whether it was their circles, to who they bought, and years later, it's the go-to industry when you want to influence. So if you want to be a transformative influencer right now, and you've got access to His Excellency, I think you need to go now and tell His Excellency, you know, now the pikipikis have done what they're supposed to do, and they are thriving. But you see, they are carrying cows, they are carrying 5 gunias, they are carrying 3 or 4 people, because the need for micro-logistics is very big. Can you please do the same for pickups? So that we zero-rate the 1-ton pickup, so that I can be honking at whoever is next there with my manure, and they are carrying their sand, and so that we can drive commerce. Let's get people to productiveness, not only to consumerism, because the problem is that with consumerism, we're just pushing people to spend. But how are we transforming people's lives in terms of bettering where they are at? And you see, that's the biggest challenge that I think we have right now. That's why the youth are disillusioned, because you find somebody who's been in politics for 40 years telling people you need to self-employ. You have been in politics for 40 years, you do not know anything else. You're always employed by the citizens, you're paid by them, you do not self-employ yourself. So why are you telling guys to self-employ? Show us how to self-employ. Give us the incentives. And I will say this without fear or favor, because the incentives are normally driven by people at the top. If I am in hotels, I go see whoever they give me what I want. If I'm in manufacturing, but who is speaking on the people who do not have a platform? That's the radio. Those are the guys who, and I like what Nema said, because you see why the vernacular stations are doing well is because they ask the governor of Kiambu or the governor of Kirinyaga a specific question about a specific dispensary or a specific road or a specific crop or a specific factory. This is not guesswork. It's not, hey guys. No, there's no hey guys here. This is these guys here or in this village want this done. And that specificity is what I think we need. And it is driven by somebody who is good. You've got a good acumen, you've got good communication skills, but you also, you read, you listen, you interact, you ask questions. It's not because you are funny. You know, you are funny, but okay, after the fun, then what do we do?
Very well said. And let's bring in Nema on this one. And I think before I ask you the question that would perhaps answer a lot of what Monene is bringing up, we have a slide on screen right now, if you can have it, Tafadhali. And this is also out of the research you did. And when I said radio reigns supreme, that is actually what you found. The viewers actually say they still want to listen to radio. Can we have that on screen? There you have it. Radio, you can see the daily listenership, weekly listenership. It's followed by television, online, newspaper, and magazines. Now, of course, with digital migration, there was a worry that some of these things, especially newspaper and magazine, would actually fall off the face of the earth. But clearly, people still hang on to the same. And Nema, at this point, let us know who determines the content, who determines the agenda. Is it the consumer or is it the media?
Right now, I'd say it's a consumer. If it was about 10, 15 years ago, people sat and listened to radio at 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, because they were being told. There was no interaction. But now, with the digital revolution and with radio becoming more interactive, it's a matter of, yes, you will tell me something, but I will rebut and I will tell you something back, and we shall have a conversation. In fact, what is becoming very, very big from what we can see in our research is something called co-creation, where the consumer will have an idea. The consumer would want to, and that's why reality shows are so big, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's basically co-creation, where they would come and talk about a particular subject or talk about a particular interest, and from that alone, now you develop some sort of following. And that is, I think, is going to be increasing. And the thing about reality shows, you either like them or you hate them. There's no halfway line. For those of us who grew up in the old school, a lot of us don't really care much for it because you wanted to escape. For us, TV, radio was an escape. You listen in, listen to your favorite DJ, listen to music, move on with your life. With TV, you watch your favorite show, move on with your life. But now, with all these reality TVs, these guys are in your face all the time. They're in your space all the time. They react to how you react to them. And it becomes an ongoing conversation. So I'd say that, yes, it is a consumer that actually determines the kind of content that we get. But this is purely in the sense of entertainment. I think when you come to something like news, it is still the station that determines how the content is laid out. Maybe the priority will be determined by what the consumers are looking for, but by and large, the content is developed by the station when it comes to news programs.
Aha. And the question here is, do we listen to our consumers? And to answer that question, if you can actually have a poll that we put out there at the weekend, and we actually asked you, do you think media outlets are informative or triggering? Do you see that? Do you find the media informative or triggering? 76.9% said the media is a trigger point. And only 23.1% said the media is informative. I'd like you to just look at that, let it sink in, so that even as we talk about how things have changed with time, even those who are in this space can understand what of the places we need to pull our socks in, literally. Macharia, somebody here has written, his name is Dennis, saying, you guys just will not do what you're expected to do and are actually pushing other people's agendas, especially when it comes to the politics of the day. Macharia, your thoughts? Macharia, do we have you? Okay, we seem to have lost him, but Janet, I think this would be an excellent point for you to chime in. Triggering, informative. That poll, what does it bring to mind?
I actually put up a post the other day saying how, whether it's timelines or media spaces right now are such a massive trigger, because there also has to be, you can't afford to be tone deaf. There's, especially with the pandemic, there's a lot of new trauma and issues that people are dealing with, right? And so what happens is if you are staying with the same script as you've always had in a newsroom or in a media house, you're not leaning in to the changing space, psychological headspace for a lot of people. It is a trigger. It's a trigger because I think from what a lot of people have told me, because I still engage people in different spaces. And I do ask them the question. That's why I love that we're having this conversation, and ask them about media and where they get their information. Do they watch bulletins? Do they watch highlights of it? And I know quite a number have said they don't like that politics is still so prioritized even in the midst of a pandemic. A few of them said that. I'm not speaking for many. For them, that was a trigger. They were saying, I've lost my job. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to take my kids to school, and you're still harping on about the same thing that has informed your top 3 stories 3-4 years ago. Why are you being tone deaf? So maybe that, I don't know whether that I could describe that as a trigger, but for them, they are triggered by it. They say, I switch off because that's being tone deaf. How are you addressing my needs right now? How are you addressing how I'm going to get back on my feet? How are you addressing the trauma that I've faced because I've lost a relative? How are you going to address healthcare? That is leaning in to what the audience wants to listen to now. And that's why it's important that as these spaces need to really lean in to what the conversations are, as opposed to saying, over the last 10 years, the agenda has always been, these will be the top 3 stories, then after the break, somewhere there we'll put the teary-eyed stories. And yet sometimes it needs to just flip over. You need to lean into the headspace people are in, the state of the country, the state of the economy, and not ignore the fact that people are evolving. Because we have so much more access to news stories, not just locally, but around the world, a lot of people now know what's fair and what's unfair to them. And that's why people are speaking out so boldly nowadays, calling out politicians, calling out lawmakers, calling out people who are supposed to be implementing policy. They know their rights. And so I do agree, it can be triggering if you are being tone deaf. Yeah, I think it's surprising that the number is that high. It's sad, but I get it. And remember, again, one of the shadow pandemics, if I can touch on that, is domestic violence and gender-based violence. And because these stories have been highlighted, sometimes they're also highlighted in a very insensitive manner. I attended the launch of a toolkit recently for how FGM should be reported in the media. It was fantastic. And the survivor was saying, you trigger me more when you sit with me and ask me questions that, again, the word I'll use, are tone deaf. It's now leaning into knowing that people are more aware of their rights. People are more aware about mental health. People are more aware about triggers. And so you cannot approach it the same way anymore. You shouldn't. You need to lean into how are conversations changing on the ground? What do people want to hear now? What will make people feel that there's hope? How do you extend impact? That should take priority. I know entertainment is important because it's light. It kind of is a bit of a relief. But the agenda, if it stays the same, if it's stiff, and if it's not in tune with what people are going through, it will be a trigger.
Okay, now I understand we have Macharia back. I'll take you right after this short break because we'd like to understand, as Janet is putting, the hard versus soft issues and how media houses have been caught in between. And the question is, are we tone deaf? And that question of the day to you again, what would you prioritize if you could influence the content in the media space? And that hashtag is new normal. We have Martin K, who says, I could influence reduction in any form of politics in the media and focus more on issues that help society to grow, develop, be more responsible and cohesive. Thank you, Martin. Peter Thuo, sports and news. Interesting, Peter. Thank you. Mwendia Ungu says, give unhealthy politics a blackout. Focus on real people, real issues, and let politicians play politics everywhere else. Clearly, yeah, the donkey is tired. Punda Mechoka. Musyoka Jr. says, if only I was influential in the media at the moment, I would give a total ban on politics and all political stuff. Give a focus on the people, their lives, and how they can better their lives. Are you hearing this is being regurgitated over and over again? Musyoka Jr. says, integrity from the political class and upholding of all human rights is best ingredients to societal morality. Thank you, Musyoka. I think that's all we have for now. When we come back, more of the feedback on that hashtag new normal. And you can also reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. So are we doing what we are meant to do, which is inform, educate, and entertain you? We'll be right back.
Family is working together today. It is creating opportunities for a lifetime of happiness. The future is bright because you can always bank on family. Family Bank, with you for life.
Introducing Ushindi Cream Bar Soap. Ushindi Cream Bar Soap with Oxy Bright removes stains effortlessly and brightens colors. Available in 1 kilogram and 800 gram bars and 175 gram tablets. Also available in all your favorite variants. Ushindi, a quality product from Pwani Oils.
As we grew up, me and my cousin realized that there was a big problem with space. Land sizes are shrinking in Kenya. On a 2x2 space with hydroponics, you can grow up to 256 plants. With its herbs, you can go all the way to 512 herbs.
The digital economy is quickly becoming the mainstay of development in Africa, and governments are seeing fertile grounds to levy different forms of taxes. We analyze the impact of these taxes on your income if you make money off the internet.
Beat sensitivity pain fast with Sensodyne Rapid Action for clinically proven relief in 60 seconds.
Here at NMG, we are working very hard to ensure your favorite publications, Daily Nation, Business Daily, Taifa Leo and the East African are readily available. In a bid to support the efforts to prevent the transmission of COVID-19, NMG has ensured our staff, our distributors and their staff adhere to set guidelines. At our printing plant, all staff are required to wash their hands before entering the factory and must be wearing a mask. All workers either change their clothes on entering the factory or wear an overcoat. We are keeping doors open to avoid our staff touching door handles repeatedly. With our automated printing, contact with the newspaper is kept to a minimum, and at the packing process, the staff observe social distancing. Vehicles used to transport the newspapers are disinfected daily before the newspapers are loaded, and our delivery staff all wear masks and wash their hands regularly. Our vendors ensure that they sanitize every time they handle money and wear their masks at all times. NMG is proud to be able to safely meet your information needs. Stay safe, stay informed with our favorite NMG publications.
Tangu mwishoni mwa mwaka jana, hapa NTV tulikuletea kipindi kipya kabisa, Kigoda Chako, ukakipenda na ukakikalia. Tukaahidi kuwaweka kwenye mizani viongozi wako, na ahadi hiyo tumeitekeleza barabara.
Watu wanaanguka kwa sababu ya maswali wanaanza kutoka jasho.
Ombi lako tangu mwanzo likawa ni moja tu, kubadilishwa wakati wa kipindi ili kukushirikisha zaidi, na hilo tumelisikia na tumetii. Sasa basi, kuanzia Jumatatu ya Aprili 12, Kigoda Chako kinahamia Jumatatu kuanzia saa 1:30 jioni. Kitakuwa moto wa kuotea mbali, papa hapa NTV.
Try Panadol Advance for relief from headaches, body aches, and fever. With Panadol's Optizorb formula, the tablet gently breaks down in the stomach, quickly absorbs, and starts providing pain relief in 15 minutes. For fast and effective pain relief that you can trust, try Panadol Advance.
Thank you for staying with us. This is Your World. My name is Gladys Gachanja, still with Janet Mbogwa Nema from Ipsos, Monene Nyaga, and of course, Macharia Gaito, even as we talk about the revolution of media. And oh my, the nuggets on this conversation. Amazing, amazing reflections being done this morning. And Macharia, before we lost you earlier on, the question was, we can see even from our viewers, they're saying, Please, you trigger us more than you inform us. How can we do better? Mashari, are you there?
To me, it's I don't. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I really am not too bothered about whether we trigger or whether we inform. For me, what matters is that we incite, we get people to think. And I've always said that I don't know who came up with this, that we as the media, unlike surgeons who bury their mistakes, we put ours on the headline. And whatever we do, we open ourselves up to instant public scrutiny. And very often it's like the fellow who goes to the football stadium to watch a game as a spectator. But from the conversation in the stands, those guys know more than the players. They are better than the coach. And they know what should be done on that field. The same thing with people who consume the media. They always know better what should have been on page 1, what should have been on page 3, what should have been covered or not covered. I'm seeing a lot of this thing about too much politics. Yeah, probably true. But at the end of the day, even those headlines are responding to certain reader preferences. It is not by accident that the biggest selling papers are the ones which always have politics most of the times on the splash. Unlike, for instance, what we might call the serious papers like Business Daily or the East African. And sometimes I wonder, those people who are forever complaining about what is on the Nation or the Standard or the People Daily headlines, whether they actually do read their preferred news elsewhere, on Business Daily or True Love or any other publication. Because also, let's face it, we have a very, very diverse media. It is not limited to the Nation. Let's say the newspaper space, for instance, is not limited to Nation and Standard. You can find a newspaper or magazine for almost every topic you think you want covered. There are journals on agriculture, there are newspapers on sports, there are magazines focusing on health, there are others focusing on family. All these things are there, and they occupy a certain space, and they are available to us if they are what we actually want.
Mashari, let me stop you. Let me stop you at that point. Nema said that it is a consumer who shapes their agenda. Janet said we are to a large extent tone deaf. Shouldn't we then change with the times and meet the needs of our consumers?
I think it's a matter of getting the balance right. Review. It's a small publication. We could not afford these high-powered companies to do our market surveys. In any case, we found that our best market survey was the vendor. Every time we are doing the distribution, the vendor would just come and tell us, this one will not sell. Kusha. Or this one will sell, get me more copies. And it was very, very effective. The newspaper vendor is just on the streets of the highways. He was our best market survey because he would tell us what to sell and would not sell, and he was very accurate. We agenda, as we strive to set the agenda, we cannot ignore viewer or reader preferences. I believe a lot of what we do will be dictated by by what those preferences are. I recall at Nation many years ago, I was called in when I think NTV was trying to rejig itself. And some high-powered marketing fellows came and said there is no audience for local content. And some of us who had come from third floor said, are you guys sure? You must be. They came up with their surveys. And we told them, you must be surveying amongst yourselves or your social circles. Because if there is such a market for Mexican soaps and Nigerian soaps, would there not be a market for equivalent Kenyan content? Kenyan products, content? And I think it was Royal Media, which threw out their surveys and went with gut feeling, and they own they own the audiences to date. There are these subtleties. There is this gut feeling. At the same time, you're trying to balance what might be popular with what you might call the higher goal of agenda setting and so on and so forth. I remember one of the last times I appeared on Press Pass before everything went south. I got into trouble. We were looking at some surveys and some research on viewer preferences and how the influencers, individuals running blogs, are catching much more traffic than NTV or KTN on the social media scene. Work and do some process, then a big audience, and they're also catching the attention of the advertisers. And I ventured that if pornography sells, well, advertisers will go there. Maybe the word pornography was not quite right, and it caused a lot of reaction. But the thing is that there are all these spaces, and all of them have their audiences. And some of us cannot compete, but there are other places where we can do well. And the audiences will always find where they want to be anyway, where they want to go.
Okay, and that's actually a fair point. And Nemba, somebody is asking, if you keep complaining that this radio station, their content has been the same over the years, yet they're still leading in terms of those numbers and getting a majority of their advertising revenue, then is a media a mirror of society?
Yes, media is a mirror of society, but I'd like to challenge the notion that stations do not change their content over time. Some of the changes might not be revolutionary, it might be organic, but the changes are there nonetheless. Yeah, and the changes are driven from the research that comes out of what the consumers say. I'll go ahead and say this: there are some media houses who are very religious about always putting out the pulse and doing researches, whether they do it in-house or whether they contract a firm such as Ipsos to do it. And what is very, very different, research, first of all, allow me, Masharia, to interject here and defend my people. Research is not focus groups. Research is not just people having a conversation around and then deciding this is what viewer preference is or what reader preference is. Research is scientific, and depending on what the brief is, depending on what you're trying to find out, you can almost make research say anything you want it to say. That is the truth. So when you see that particular stations are getting advertising throughout, it could be one of two things. They have connected with their audiences, and it tells you that, yes, it is a mirror of society, however rubbishy we might think that content is. But two, it could also be perception is reality. I remember when I was in the media planning side, when I used to work for agency, we would recommend a particular station to a client for their brand because of affinity. We felt for whatever this brand is, this particular station is the best one for you. And that station was not necessarily number one. but it was the right one for that environment because of the audiences that station attracted. But then the client comes back and says, no, I want to be where my competition is, regardless of whether or not it was going to actually, deliver for them in terms of their brand. And that's why you'll find that some stations that continuously get advertising, a lot of it is perception. And because people, unfortunately, Kenyans, we're hard creatures. Why I say we're hard creatures, how else do you explain why every other business nowadays that is being opened is a car wash? It's the same mentality in advertising, where people don't like to challenge. People don't like to be different from others. And what will set apart the station that is able to get its audiences and get the right sort of advertising is how good they are at explaining who they are, who they're speaking to, and doing that with facts and data. That's what is lacking in this business, and that's why you find the kind of scenario you're talking about, Gladys.
Very well said. And at this point, even as we start to wrap up this conversation, I think it is important, and I think this has been touched on in different ways, the importance of valuing the sphere of this influence. And this begs the question, what entails building a tenable legacy, whether it's for the media house or the brands therein? What is this that entails building this tenable legacy? I'll start off with you, Monene Nyaga.
Well, I think it's a multiplicity of factors, but the one thing that I believe is that there's a statement I was given once by a man that I will not quote, and he said, if you don't know where you're going, you will never get lost. If you don't know where you're going, you will never get lost. And I think that in itself is what defines what your legacy will be. And if the direction that you take, you're consistent, and just listen to what Nema is saying, the fact that you stay true to what your audience expectations and needs are, and in this day and age, giving them the right interventions. And I shall give you an example. We were having a very heated debate the other day with someone when I said, I think why people are not changing their behavior when it comes to COVID rules is because social distancing is a foreign term. And they asked me, Monena, what do you mean? I said, social distancing means different things to different people. The affluent are social distanced by being affluent. They live far away, they use helicopters, and you only see them when they want us to see them. The middle class, with their working spaces, can understand that. It's like telling kids, shift your desks, stay away from 2 meters. That works. But that is like almost 20 to 30% of your total audience. If you come to where Kenyans really live, the question is, would the CS for Health go and do his briefings for COVID in the middle of Mokuru kwa Ruben and then show us how to social distance with a household that has they use one ablution block, 20 of them. I mean, there the word social distancing does not exist. And I believe if I am sitting on a platform as a presenter and my listeners are those guys, I need even to tailor make that campaign by MOH to be able to resonate with them. And I'm saying this because speaking about legacy, back in the day when we used to have Population Council of Kenya, and then we used to have PSI campaigns, we used to do behavior change campaigns. And one time I sat in a boardroom and you see the client has said, no, but I don't think people are hearing. I said, I think we're using the wrong deterrent because we're telling people they're going to die. Death is not an influence of behavior change on the majority of people because death happens anyway. So, and these guys are surrounded by it. It's crime, it's disease, it's everything that poverty brings. And so maybe let's look for something else. It is easy to use that on the middle class and the affluent because they've got something to lose. I don't want to leave my big house. I don't want to leave my many wives. I don't want to leave my cars. So I will behave because I don't want to lose this. But for somebody who has nothing to lose, what are you telling them? And I think the true legacy that you leave as a media practitioner and also as an institution is how you impact the life of your audience in very many facets, whether it be in advocating for better education standards, wanakandamizwa health, whether it is in transport. And by the way, it is very easy to latch on relationships because it is what everybody is passionate to and everybody has one. And maybe that's why a lot of radio stations are doing that. And, you know, we also want to eavesdrop. It's like having access to a small curtain where you always hope and say, so what's Nani doing in his room? And we can't see. And it's true, it will always get bigger numbers. And I will also say this without fear of contradiction. If our telcos were to say where they make most of their money when it comes to data, it is not in streaming gospel music or watching live news. It is on X-rated sites. So what are we going to do about that? The money is coming in. Yes, the data bundles are expiring at a very high rate. But so what's your space in this? What are you going to do? And you have to stay true to the people who you believe are your core. And also avoid copycat business, because unfortunately, also with the proliferation of media, there are very many people who want to be Monene, there are very many people who want to be Mainakagani, there are many people who want to be Kengani, there are many people who want to be other people. Be yourself and stay true to what it is that you believe your mission in that space is. And I think you will have your legacy.
All right, very well said. Over to you, Macharia, briefly.
I would say be jealous, be selfish, be possessive. It is, if I talk about me as a journalist, it is about myself and about how my readers and my audiences perceive me. It is not about Nation Media or Royal Media or Standard. It is my reputation at stake. Therefore, I will be absolutely professional. I will be absolutely ethical. I will be whatever it is that I need to be for my readers to trust me. Because when I write my column on Tuesdays, or I do a long piece of political analysis, at the end of the day, when people react, they react to me, not necessarily to Nation. And I always say, as a journalist, my only selling point is my expertise, my skills, my integrity. If I'm going to get caught up doing funny things like sucking up to politicians or taking brown envelopes or misusing that space, it is me who suffers. And once my credibility is gone, my journalism is gone. I remember way back during the days of that thing called YK92, many of our colleagues got sucked up in that. Some were very experienced, very prominent journalists. And the moment they were exposed, that was the end of their careers. They have never recovered. Some are still in the media today, but they have never recovered because nobody can ever take them seriously again. You cannot preach water and drink wine. Just be honest, just be truthful, be impeccable in your approach, and of course, try to be the best. Quality, there is no substitute for quality. There is no substitute for good work. There is no substitute for expertise, which means you must be widely read. You must understand your environment and surroundings. You must do your research all the time. You must know your subject. Whether you are writing on sports or from the courts or the social scene or you are a radio DJ, just strive to be the best. As simple as that.
Thank you, Macharia. And Janet, you have been a broadcast journalist, retired, thinking of getting back in this space. And with time, one of the revolutions has been our look. The hairs became bigger. We have straighter hair. Our skirts have been told to become shorter with time just to get the audiences that we need. But at the end of the day, we are talking about having a tenable legacy. What does that entail?
Yeah, I love what both Munene and Macharia have said. You know, Macharia has talked about being the best. He's talked about excellence. I think in short, he's talked about always thriving for excellence and not losing yourself. Munene as well talked about not losing yourself. Those are things that I wish people would listen to more. You know, when you kind of listen in on conversations of people who are appreciated for the legacy they have and for the role they played, really listen to what they're saying. It's not usually this grandiose kind of unattainable thing. It's values. It's the little things that are often taken for granted. Little things like keeping time, being detail-oriented, being excellent in your delivery. Yes, I remember 2007 was kind of like the launch of new anchors.
Yeah.
I was in that wave. There was me, I think, Esther, Lillian. It was very interesting because we were pretty young. You know, Beatrice Marshall had just trained us, Joroge Mwaura, another veteran. And yes, it was a little strange to be in this shift of your hair has to look a certain way, your outfits have to be a certain way. Crazy thing is it brought viewership, so maybe we need to question the audience a little bit. But I did fight it a little bit, and then I just gave up fighting it because as long as they were like, we're not trying to tell you to sell yourself, we're just saying there's a shift in people also appreciating style. I made peace with it, it's fine. But going back to legacy, it's you know, this job is very, it's very powerful. I look at an example where we highlighted periods of shame on mainstream media primetime news during the show I used to host on Citizen. And it was about girls not having access to sanitary products. Brought that conversation into a talk show I used to host. The next day, the MPs of that area fought back and said we were stage managing it, so they reacted. Suddenly, the country was up in arms saying, how is it 2013 and period poverty exists, right? And so I was triggered, formed my foundation in Uadada, and I mean, I formed the foundation a little later, but at that time I told my boss, we need to do something because people are reacting. She said, okay, come up with something. And the initiative at the time was really to address the lack of access to products and also to increase budgetary allocation, because what came out was there wasn't enough. Long story short, budgetary allocation was increased. So it shifted policy. And that's what this job can do. If we're able to hold true and stay true to the scope of influence that it can have on lives and not take it for granted, which is why I hear Masharia, I'm not, you know, we're not discounting politics. It'll always be relevant, it will always be necessary. I'm saying that these issues, which are normally called softer issues.
Oh dear,
that word,
softer issues.
But this is what we are all facing, and that's why the show I did Monday Special had a lot of engagement, because it was relatable. Every week, I was either talking about, you know, intimate partner violence, the next day it would be diabetes, the next day it would be... People could tune in and say, I'm going to find something that I'm going to relate to. That's never left me. My foundation now, I have a book out which is around storytelling to break the stigma on menstrual health. You know, I've been able to have access and sit on various committees, even on a global level, because I never left that behind. The excellence, the ethics, the training of the job, but also the power of what you can do when you extend it beyond being on the screen. Yes, I'm sure I'll go back one day. But for now, I'm exploring. I love exploring. Like I said, I love exploring new spaces. Yeah. TikTok is another one. It's very strange. It really is. I'm pretty sure I'm too old for TikTok. But they almost compromised a Trump rally in the US. Yes, TikTokers. Did, yeah. So we cannot ignore the power of it. But yes, I think legacy is all about, I think Munene said it, or Mashari, how did you make people feel? Yeah, did you feel heard? Yeah, so it's important.
A good one. And you're the person who comes to us with the media trends. You've seen them shift over the years. In 30 seconds, if you can, the importance of this legacy and who stands out through the years.
I think I'd say to media houses, know who you are. Know what you stand for. And if you don't, find out who you are. And then once you decide the path you're going, stick to it. And the rest will follow. Don't spend your time reacting to what is happening with other media houses. It's not about being number one anymore. It's about being authentic with your audiences. It's about connecting with your advertisers. It's about respecting the craft of the journalists who work for you. I think that's my parting shot.
Thank you, Nema Wamai, Media Director, Ipsos SSA, Janet Mbogwa, Media Personality, author My First Time, and of course founder of Inua Dada Foundation, Monene Nyaga, Media Personality, former radio presenter, and of course Macharia Gaitho, who is a columnist with our Daily Nation. He is an independent journalist. Thank you all for being part of this amazing conversation, one that was overdue actually, even as we look at the place and the role we play in society. Now, tomorrow we continue with our series on safeguarding our mental wellness as we face yet another phase of lockdowns and the resulting interruptions to our daily lives with massive job losses and income losses. How do we ensure we keep our head above water on a personal and also a family level? More on this conversation from 7 a.m. See you then.